Hi and welcome. I'm Andy Miuch and you are watching A News. Here's what's making the news right now. Donald Trump threatens Russia with secondary tariffs on its oil exports. Reportedly threatens to bomb Iran. French far-right leader Marine Le Pen found guilty of embezzlement. Court hands her 5-year ban on running for public office. 3 people die in a gas explosion at a mosque in Uzbekistan. The blast comes during Eid. Thank you for tuning in. US President Donald Trump threatened Russia with so-called secondary sanctions and Iran reportedly with bombing. Airing his grievances with Moscow over Ukraine, Trump said he wouldn't like to impose sanctions on countries trading with Russia and that they, quote, wouldn't be good for them. NBC reported that he threatened Tehran with bombing if a nuclear deal isn't made.
US President Donald Trump says he's prepared to impose secondary tariffs on Russian oil exports if, he says, Moscow continues to obstruct negotiations for a ceasefire in Ukraine. That's according to an interview with NBC News. He's referring to penalties that he could place on other nations and businesses that engage in trade with Moscow. The move would target global buyers of Russian oil, potentially pressuring allies and rivals alike. The tax hikes potentially could be as high as 50%. But Trump says he believes that Russian President Vladimir Putin will come round.
I think he'll be okay. But if he isn't, I was disappointed in a certain way. Some of the things that were said over the last day or two having to do with Zelensky, because when he considers Zelensky not credible, he's supposed to be making a deal with him, whether you like him or you don't like him. So I wasn't happy with that. But I think he's going to be good. And I certainly wouldn't want to put secondary tariffs on Russia, but if they were put on, it would not be.
The president has also threatened similar action against Iran, warning that if Tehran refuses to negotiate a new nuclear agreement, the consequences could be military in nature. He was quoted saying that failure to strike a deal could result in bombing, the likes of which they have never seen before.
We're going to make a decision on secondary tariffs on Iran based on whether or not they're going to make a deal. If they're going to make a deal, then we're never going to put secondary tariffs on. We're going to hope they have a great, long, and successful life as a country. But we'll see what happens. It's very interesting. I can't imagine them doing anything else but making a deal.
It follows Iran's rejection of direct nuclear talks with America after Trump sent a letter to Iran's supreme leader earlier in the month, urging renewed diplomatic engagement. However, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian says Tehran is open to indirect negotiations.
Direct negotiations with the US have been rejected, but Iran has always been involved in indirect negotiations. And now, too, the Supreme Leader has emphasized that indirect negotiations can still continue.
Since the collapse of the 2015 nuclear deal, it's believed that Iran has ramped up uranium enrichment well beyond previously agreed limits. Western powers argue this signals a move toward weapons capability, but Tehran insists its nuclear activities are strictly for civilian energy use. Experts warn that secondary tariffs could strain relations with third-party nations and complicate global energy markets, already under pressure from multiple conflicts.
Following reports of a bombing threat by the US, Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has warned of a forceful retaliation if his country is attacked. On the Iranian response, we earlier spoke to political analyst from Tehran, Turaj Shiralilu.
Iran and the United States are upping the ante in the wake of exchange of letters between US President Donald Trump and Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei. But this situation is emerging to be getting hotter and hotter, not only in terms of hostile rhetoric, but also in terms of showing up of military strength. On Monday, Ayatollah Khamenei in the Eid al-Fitr prayer sermons said that any military adventurism against Iran will be responded decisively and retaliated strongly. And on Sunday, Mr. Trump once again threatened that if Iran doesn't enter into negotiations over its nuclear program, Iran will be bombarded, and for the first time, he used the language of threatening Iran with secondary tariffs. Iran, of course, according to official news, has agreed with indirect talks with the United States, but as long as U.S. does not put away its bullying or maximum pressure campaign.
And now to talk on the Trump's latest on Kremlin, Kiev and sanctions, we go live to New York and Yulia O'Connell of the Dignitas organization. Hi, Yulia. Let's dive into it. Last week, we heard Vladimir Putin suggesting a UN-run government in Ukraine, heavily criticizing Volodymyr Zelensky. Then we heard Donald Trump saying he's very angry with Putin. Where are we right now?
Well, we are right now at what we talked about 2 months ago, when President Trump believed that Putin is his, he has a friendly relationship with Putin. He is coming to a realization that somebody who he had believed to have a good terms with is manipulating, is playing games, is procrastinating, taking his time. He is pretty much lying about, not pretty much, lying about everything he is agreed to do. He about ceasefire, when he says, Putin says, he's actually doing the very, very simple things. He is lying and taking his time. When he said that he agreed to ceasefire and bombed Ukraine even more the next day, right after the call with President Trump, he bombed Ukrainian energy grid, schools, playgrounds. We've seen the family of mother, father, and a girl killed. That's happening all during the ceasefire talks. So President Trump, he has a very human reaction. He doesn't like to be played for a fool. He doesn't like to be manipulated. So his reaction is extremely human, and he lives in a human world, not like Putin in his dictatorship la la land. So he has a very human reaction. First, he gets impatient, then he gets angry. And it's a very, very, honestly, anybody would feel and react that way.
What do you make of his new tool? He said he would use the so-called secondary sanctions, basically tariffs on countries that would import Russian oil if Moscow doesn't honor the ceasefire.
Well, that's the word 50% tariffs as a secondary tariffs on the Russian oil. That's what we love to hear. That's the word tariffs that all America, we do love to hear, unless Canadian or Mexican tariffs. That is very controversial question. And it's being supported it has a bipartisan support. So it's not only President Trump, it's Lindsey Graham from Republican senator, is Senator Shaheen, Democrat, head of the Foreign Affairs Committee. They're putting very strong and robust sanctions that could be implemented 2 weeks from now. Could be in hearing 2 weeks from now, and that's where time expires for the 30 days that President Trump had for talks and have implementation of ceasefire that Ukraine fully agreed. 2 weeks passed. Russia had done nothing, even though they said they would. So in 2 weeks, we're going to see probably and hopefully a lot more than just 50% tariffs on their secondary tariffs, as we say. That's where India and Indian, Chinese, some Turkish banks and oil refineries will be affected. But we also have this bipartisan support of $300 billion Russian frozen assets given to Ukraine to continue support Ukraine to be strong, because when you fight Russia with dictatorship, that's very unfortunate that that the peace comes through military support, through strength, and that's where we stand.
Yulia, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, we're staying with Trump's remarks on Ukraine. He said that Volodymyr Zelensky is reconsidering the minerals deal with the U.S. Trump warned that backing out of the deal could have serious consequences.
Do you think they are right now?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think he wants to make a deal. And I think Zelensky, by the way, I see he's trying to back out of the rare earth deal. And if he does that, he's got some problems, big problems. We made a deal on rare earth. And now he's saying, well, you know, I want to renegotiate the deal. He wants to be a member of NATO. Well, he was never going to be a member of NATO. He understands that. So if he's looking to renegotiate the deal, he's got big problems.
Trump's warning to Ukraine comes after Volodymyr Zelensky said the new U.S. minerals deal is entirely different from the previous one, adding it requires a legal review. He made it clear that Ukraine would not accept any deal that threatens its European Union integration. Zelensky also said that Kyiv does not see the U.S. military aid as a loan that needs to be repaid. Meanwhile, a statement by Russian President's investment envoy was released, saying that Washington and Moscow have begun talks on joint rare earth metals and other projects in Russia.
This Monday, Russian Special Envoy mentioned that US and Russia are discussing cooperation in the field of rare earth metals exploration. Kirill Dmitriev said that rare earth metals are an important area for cooperation, and they already began negotiations and discussions on various projects. Russia holds the world's fifth largest reserves of the metals that are used in lasers and military equipment. Rare earths are a group of 17 metals used to make magnets that turn power into motion for electric vehicles, cell phones, missile systems, and other electronics. There are no known substitutes. The U.S. Geological Survey estimates Russia's reserves of rare earth metals at 3.8 million metric tons, but Moscow has far higher estimates. Dmitriev was a part of the Russia's negotiating team at the talks with U.S. in Saudi Arabia in February. The cooperation may be further discussed at the next round of Russia-U.S. talks that may take place in mid-April in Saudi Arabia.
Ukraine's president has called for international support to ensure accountability for war crimes committed in his country since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that more than 180,000 war crimes have been documented since Moscow's February 2022 full-scale invasion. Kyiv claims the atrocities includes abduction, torture and murder, and is seeking help from its allies to hold the Kremlin accountable.
More than 183,000 crimes related to the aggression of the Russian Federation have already been registered. And this is without access to a significant part of the temporarily occupied territory of our state. There are still thousands, maybe tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of crimes.
Zelensky stressed that these are crimes not only of the Russian state, but also of specific individuals, each of whom must be convicted. These remarks come as Ukraine marks the third anniversary of Bucha's liberation from Russia. The commemoration of the fallen soldiers, including those who defended Bucha in the first days of Russia's attacks, took place at the local cemetery. Officials say Moscow's forces had committed more than 9,000 crimes in the area, including 1,800 killings. The vast majority of war crimes cases are being investigated by Ukraine and tried locally, but the International Criminal Court has conducted its own investigations into separate high-profile episodes, issuing arrest warrants for Russian President Vladimir Putin and ex-Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu for the deportation of Ukrainian children and the targeting of Ukraine's energy grid.
European foreign ministers pledged new aid to Kyiv, while they also consider new sanctions on Moscow to push for a ceasefire. Speaking ahead of the ministerial meeting in Madrid, Poland foreign minister said the decision on whether foreign troops should be present on Ukrainian soil is up to Kyiv. The EU's foreign policy chief Kaja Kallas stressed that for a ceasefire, Russia must demonstrate goodwill. She urged the US to increase pressure on Russia.
What we need is also Russia to agree to this ceasefire, to move on, to show goodwill by, giving back the Ukrainian children that have been deported to Russia or releasing the prisoners of war. Many things that they can show. So I think U.S. also has the role to put more pressure on Russia to stop this war.
Just earlier, we spoke to Michael Hack, an analyst out of Berlin, on Germany's new approach to its own and European security. Here's what he had to say about Germany enabling billions in defense spending.
We just recently had elections, and there's a broader debate in society how to progress with our policies, which have a direct effect on Europe. Germany is the key country here in Europe when it comes to building the bridge between East and West. And what we are doing here, particularly with our military, is a change of time. So our former Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, called that a Zeitenwende, so change of time, with, as you described, larger defense package which is there. But there's more to it now, and what is needed is a real ability to defend itself. And this is new to Germany, because before we were always under the shield, under the defense of the US, and this relationship is under stress. And we don't know how that will continue. So one of the measures which are discussed currently in the coalition talks is to stock up the German army and to have again this mandatory military service in place.
Now over to Paris, where French far-right leader Marine Le Pen was found guilty of embezzlement of European funds. A court handed her a 4 years prison sentence and a 5-year ban from running for public office. Far-right leaders from across the globe were quick to show support to Le Pen, and her legal team said they will appeal the verdict.
Far-right leader Marine Le Pen has been convicted of embezzling European Union funds and sentenced to a 4-year prison term, with 2 years suspended, along with a 5-year ban from holding public office. This ruling significantly impacts her prospects for the 2027 French presidential election, where she was considered a leading candidate. The sentence stops her from running in the 2027 presidential race. Paris court president said Le Pen's actions were a serious and lasting attack on democratic rules. She left the courtroom before the full sentence was read. Currently a French MP, Le Pen was convicted alongside 8 MEPs and 12 assistants for misusing European Parliament funds to pay party staff in France. Prosecutors had sought a 5-year prison sentence, including 2 years suspended, a €300,000 fine and ineligibility to run for office, requesting the ban stand even if appealed. French Justice Minister Gérald Darmanin previously called the prospect of barring Le Pen from elections profoundly shocking. Polls had placed her as the leading contender to succeed Emmanuel Macron, who cannot seek a third term. Under her leadership, the National Rally has tried to distance itself from its extremist roots. The ruling has drawn support in social media from her European allies, with Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban posting "Je suis Marine" on X. Swedish journalist, political commentator Peter Sweden posted on X that, quote, "Marine Le Pen banned from being able to become the French president in 2027. She was the favourite to win. Is this what democracy looks like?" The leader of Spain's far-right Vox party, Santiago Abascal, gave his support to French far-right leader Marine Le Pen after her conviction by a French court posting a message on AX saying they will not succeed in silencing the voice of the French people. The National Rally president Jordan Bardella called the verdict an attack on democracy, claiming Le Pen was unjustly condemned.
As the death toll from the massive quake that struck Myanmar has risen to at least 2,000, the UN and various aid organizations warn that the fallout of the disaster will exacerbate hunger and disease outbreaks in a country already torn by civil war. Neighboring Thailand has confirmed 19 people have died in the earthquake. Laura Westbrook reports from Bangkok.
The search and rescue operation is continuing here in Bangkok to try and find those trapped underneath that mountain of rubble. All that is left of a more than 30-story building that was under construction when it collapsed during Friday's earthquake. Now, we are now past the critical 72-hour window, but officials insist teams are not giving up and are working as fast as they can. They've been using excavators to shift the debris and concrete out of the way. International teams are also here, including the United States military personnel who are providing assistance for the families of the dozens of missing, including reportedly workers from Myanmar. It's an agonizing and exhausting wait. Meanwhile, the search and rescue operation on a much bigger scale is continuing in Myanmar, where the United Nations says the scale of the disaster is vast. Critical infrastructure like roads, bridges and communication are damaged. Hospitals are reportedly overwhelmed and thousands are sleeping in the open, afraid of aftershocks and unable to return to their homes which are damaged. And further complicating efforts is the armed conflict that has been ongoing since the military junta seized power in a 2021 coup that ousted the democratically elected government. The UN is calling for unimpeded humanitarian access regardless of who is in control. But aid agencies in Myanmar say their teams on the ground still don't have a true picture of the devastation. While teams from China, India and Russia have arrived and aid agencies are mobilizing, getting to the areas that needs that aid remains a challenge. Laura Westbrook for A News, Bangkok.
At least 3 people have been killed and 10 others injured in a gas explosion in the east of Uzbekistan. Officials said the blast occurred in the bathroom of a mosque in the Andijan region during the Muslim holiday of Eid al-Fitr. An investigation into the cause of the explosion is underway. Muslims all around the world mark the end of the holy month of fasting, Ramadan, celebrating Eid with prayers and feasts.
Muslims around the world are celebrating Eid al-Fitr to mark the end of the holy month of Ramadan. It is one of 2 most important holidays for Muslims worldwide and is marked with congregational prayers, feasts and gatherings. In Syria, Muslim worshippers attended Eid al-Fitr prayers for the first time since the fall of Bashar al-Assad, former president who was ousted by a rebel group. Many of them flocked to mosques in Damascus and Aleppo, expressing joy and hope about rebuilding their country. In India, congregational prayers known as namaz were held at various mosques across the country, including the iconic Jama Masjid in Delhi, where a massive crowd gathered to partake in the festivities. In Indonesia, the second largest Muslim country, an unusual sight unfolded on the south coast of Java Island, as thousands of Muslims assembled on a sand dune in Bantul for mass prayers, a departure from the customary mosque setting. Pakistan also saw celebrations as thousands gathered at mosques and open spaces, including the railway ground in Karachi. A 3-day holiday has been declared in the country where more than 90% of its 240 million population practice Islam. Malaysia marked their celebrations with the firing of cannons, a tradition that dates back to 1937. The cannons, once made from bamboo, have evolved over time, with steel versions emerging in recent decades to replace the original design. Every year, about 2 tons of cobalt is used to fire over 80 cannons in celebration. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates also saw celebrations, whilst countries including Iraq, Jordan and Egypt announced that the holiday will begin on Monday. The variation is a result of differences in moon sightings that determine the end of Ramadan, the month of fasting and spiritual reflection.
Tajikistan, Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan have signed a historic agreement marking the junction point of their shared borders during a summit in Khujand. Our Fariza Kalimurzina brings more.
A historic summit took place today in Khujand, where the leaders of Uzbekistan, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan signed a groundbreaking agreement on their shared border junction. Along with this, they adopted a joint declaration committing to transform their borders into a zone of peace, stability and development. This deal follows 23 years of negotiations, resolving long-standing disputes in the Fergana Valley. For Kyrgyzstan's President Japarov, this marks his first visit to Tajikistan since the border reopened in the middle of March. He and Tajik President Emomali Rahmon also signed agreements on water resources and infrastructure projects. In a significant move, the two presidents launched the Sogdatka power transmission line, which connects the energy grids. This $1.2 billion project, part of a broader effort to export electricity to Afghanistan and Pakistan, marks a major step in regional cooperation. Mirziyoyev's participation in the trilateral summit provided additional regional momentum for discussions on economic cooperation and the strengthening of good neighborly relations in Central Asia. Border tensions between Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, which date back to the Soviet era, have led to over 230 incidents, with the most intense fighting occurring between 2019 and 2020, resulting in heavy losses of both sides. A root cause of these conflicts has been the unclear status of 70 sections along the 984-kilometer border. However, since 2022, both sides have been working to resolve the issue. Today's agreement marks the final step in putting an end to these disputes. The media has described this agreement as a triumph of diplomacy. It includes the exchange of territories and the reopening of several land checkpoints along the border, which had been closed. Experts see this agreement as a shift of conflict to cooperation, enhancing regional security and holding broader significance for Central Asia and the global community. Fariza Kalimurzina, A News, in Almaty, Kazakhstan.
The presidents of Slovenia and Kazakhstan, Natasha Pirc-Musar and Kasim Jomart Tokayev, met in Astana, marking the beginning of a 2-day official visit. The talks focused on boosting cooperation in trade, investment and sustainable business practices. During the meeting, Kazakhstan's president highlighted that Slovenian investments in the country have reached nearly $200 million, with 19 Slovenian companies active in key sectors. The leaders also discussed the potential of Slovenia's port Koper joining the Trans-Caspian International Transport Corridor. Additionally, several new projects in green energy, digital innovation and healthcare were announced. Relations between Georgia and the European Union are facing renewed strain as Brussels again raised concerns over the country's democratic trajectory. Tbilisi rejected those concerns as interference in domestic affairs. Nini Nikolaishvili brings more from Tbilisi.
The European Union's position on Georgia remains unchanged following the last year's parliamentary elections. High Representative Kaja Kallas has reiterated the EU's concerns, stating, and I quote, "Since the last year we have seen serious democratic backsliding, repression against civilians and the imprisonment of journalists and innocent protesters." These remarks come amid ongoing tensions between Tbilisi and Brussels over the subject of democratic standards and human rights in Georgia. In the last few hours, the news has tried to reach out to Georgian officials for their response to Kallas' statement. We will certainly update you regarding this. What has been the case before is that the Georgian Dream officials has consistently rejected such accusations. The party condemned the EU stance, accusing it of political bias, excessive bureaucracy, and the interference in Georgia's sovereignty. The officials repeatedly stated that they view EU criticism as the attempt of pressure on Georgian government into aligning with Western political standards. While the EU continues to push for reforms they believe is necessary for country's European integration, the Georgian government remains defiant, further straining relations between Brussels and Tbilisi. This is Nini Nikolashvili reporting from Tbilisi, News.
Azerbaijani Defense Ministry stated that Armenian armed forces attempted 3 reconnaissance flights over Azerbaijani positions near Gedenzur settlement using drones. The ministry added that from 10:30 in the evening on the 30th of March to 4:35 in the morning the next day, Armenian units intermittently opened fire on Azerbaijani positions using small arms, targeting areas from Goris, Basar-Kecher and Chambarak regions. There has been no official response from Yerevan. The incidents come amid ongoing peace negotiations between the two countries. While talks have shown cautious progress, Baku continues to call for full respect of its territorial integrity and steps toward previous agreements. Armenia has taken another step in distancing itself from the Collective Security Treaty Organization. Yerevan confirmed that it will not sign off on the organization's 2024 budget, effectively withdrawing its financial support of the military alliance.
Armenia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs announced that it will not sign the CSTO's 2024 budget approval document. The country has informed the CSTO Secretariat of its decision to halt funding for the organization's operations. This move follows recent remarks by Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Alexander Pankin. He warned that if Armenia fails to meet its financial obligations by the end of 2025, CSTO member states may reconsider its role in the alliance. In early 2024, Armenia officially suspended its participation in the organization. Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has repeatedly addressed Armenia's shifting stance. He stated that while the country has effectively withdrawn from CSTO operations, it still maintains a technical presence by not vetoing documents. In September, Prime Minister described the CSTO as a security threat to Armenia and declared that the point of no return in relations had already been passed. The Kremlin dismissed Pashinyan's claim, with spokesperson Dmitry Peskov insisting that the CSTO protects member states' sovereignty and poses no threat. Armenia's growing estrangement from Russia is also evident in its decision to freeze participation in CSTO military drills and reject invitations to summits. The rift between Armenia and Russia has deepened in recent months, particularly after the restoration of territorial integrity of Azerbaijan in September 2023.
Today marks a solemn moment in history, the March days of 1918. Events that unfolded in Baku over a century ago shaped not only Azerbaijan, but the entire Caucasus region.
In March 1918, the Caucasus found itself caught in a complex web of power struggles, set against the backdrop of the crumbling Russian Empire and the turbulent rise of Bolshevism. With Russia embroiled in revolution and World War I raging across Europe, the Caucasus became a battleground of competing ideologies, ambitions, and interests. Baku, rich in oil and strategically vital, became the epicenter of violence. Bolshevik forces, driven by revolutionary zeal, exploited existing tensions among diverse communities, fueling instability. Tragically, this resulted in horrific violence, with an estimated 12,000 to 20,000 civilians perishing across ethnic and religious lines within just a few days. Historical records depict these events not simply as ethnic clashes, but rather as orchestrated outcomes of broader geopolitical maneuvering. The Bolshevik agenda was clear: use local tensions to assert control and secure the vital oil resources of Baku. which at that time produced about 7 million tons of oil annually, accounting for more than half of the global supply. Small nations and communities of the Caucasus, hoping for independence and self-determination after the fall of the Russian Empire, found themselves manipulated, caught between powerful interests far beyond their control. At the same time, the First World War created additional pressures, with major powers such as Britain and Germany also vying for influence and resources in the region. Each saw the Caucasus as a critical front in their wider strategic ambitions. Local peoples were often used as pawns, given promises only to find themselves abandoned when it no longer suited external interests. The complex interplay of imperial ambitions and revolutionary ideologies turned the region into a tragic theater of conflict. The March days were a stark example of how global interests could devastate local populations, resulting in atrocities and lasting divisions. Today, over a century later, the lessons from March 1918 remain deeply relevant. The region, home to over 15 million people today, has witnessed immense suffering yet holds enormous potential for lasting peace and cooperation. The tragedies remind us of the dangers when external powers exploit local divisions. However, today also brings hope. Opportunities for peace and regional integration are stronger than ever, especially now, with real and tangible processes underway. Recent peace negotiations between Azerbaijan and Armenia have marked a significant turning point. After decades of conflict over the Karabakh region, the 2020 ceasefire and subsequent diplomatic engagements have opened pathways to lasting peace. Both nations are now actively discussing border demarcation, transport links, economic cooperation, and restoring trust. The end of the Karabakh conflict presents the Caucasus with an unprecedented opportunity. Regional initiatives like the opening of transportation corridors promise enhanced connectivity, economic development, and stability not only for Azerbaijan and Armenia but for the broader region. These developments represent genuine progress towards mutual understanding and regional prosperity. Remembering the March days of 1918 isn't just about honoring the past. It's about learning its lessons and seizing the opportunity for peace. With concrete steps towards reconciliation and cooperation, the Caucasus region stands at a historic crossroads, with peace and partnership finally within reach. The challenge and the choice is here.
Well, that's all we have for you for now. Thank you for watching, but don't go anywhere. Stay tuned for our context, this time on the Iranian-Turkish rivalry in the South Caucasus.